This episode is made possible by our sponsor, Landmark College, the college for students who learn differently, offering comprehensive supports for students with ADHD and other learning differences, both on campus and online. Learn more at lcdistraction.org.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Distraction. I'm your guest host, Alisyn Camerata. One of the biggest reasons that I wanted to do this podcast was because I have long been baffled by the concept of helicopter parenting. And I wanted to explore how we got here. I don't understand how in the space of one short generation we have swung from being free-range kids, as I was, as so many kids were in the 80s, where we had just ultimate freedom. We were kind of semi-parented, I would say, to us becoming helicopter parents ourselves. What is that? I mean, I hear so many people say they don't like being helicopter parents. They don't think it's the best way to raise kids. So why are we doing it? How did we get here? So I knew that I wanted to speak to one of the experts on this, who is Lenore Skenazy. Lenore wrote the book Free Range Kids: How to Raise Safe, Self-Reliant Children Without Going Nuts with Worry. I mean, there it is. That's the whole kit and caboodle right there. And I wish we could go back to the free range era, but we talk about why the horses left the barn on that one. So Lenore spoke to me from her cottage in upstate New York about this pendulum in parenting and why moms and dads have become so fearful. Lenore, I'm so excited to talk to you and so looking forward to this. I don't know if you remember, but I interviewed you on Fox.
Oh my God, really?
And it was either right after your book or it was right after your article. So I don't remember the difference. Yeah, I know your article was like 2008, and then I don't know when your book came out.
Like 2009, yeah.
2009. And you have always stuck with me. You've always stuck with me.
Wow, so cool.
Your wisdom and your wording has always stuck with me because because of you, refer to my own upbringing as free range. I mean, It's just the perfect phrase that you fastened on because we were free range. And I now, so fast forward, so from that time that I first interviewed you about your history of believing in free range parenting as opposed to helicopter parenting, I now have 3 kids.
Oh, wow.
I have twin 16-year-old daughters, and I have a 14-year-old son. So obviously they must have been babies or toddlers or whatever when I first interviewed you. And I, every single day, without fail, wrestle with the fact that I, a free-range 80s kid, have somehow become a helicopter parent and am living in this helicopter era. And it bums me out to no extent. So
I know.
How did this happen? How did it happen that these kind of unparented or semi-parented 80s kids became helicopter parents?
Well, here I am talking to someone who works in the media, so I will be a little delicate when I talk about what I think really happened, and it did happen in the 80s.
Well, lay it on me. Lay it on me,
okay.
Even though I'm in the media. Just give it to me straight.
Okay. Well, first of all, let's just talk about helicopter parenting for a second, which is that people think I'm the anti-helicopter mom. And first of all, I'm part helicopter on my mom's side. I am a nervous mom myself, so it's not like I have the perfect recipe for never worrying about anything about your kids again. I don't. I wish I did. I would take it myself. But I also think that to blame parents is crazy, because if it happened to you and you didn't want it to happen to you, and it happened to me, I didn't want it to happen to me, and all these other parents are there wondering, how did I get so afraid? How did I get so worried that I have to have my kid text? The minute they get 3 houses down to their friend's house, and I have the mother, send me a picture, he got here okay. Obviously, it's not you or me individually. It's a society that shifted. And it shifted towards fear. It shifted towards all fear all the time. And it began in the 80s, I think, with in two horrible tragedies. One was the Eitan Pate's disappearance in 1979, and then Adam Walsh's disappearance in 1982. And then along came a mini series about Adam Walsh disappearing that broke all records. And the media is there to make some money, right? It's not just there to inform you. It's there to bring in more and more eyeballs, which then, they can sell to advertisers. And once the media world realized that this was almost the greatest story ever told, a white middle class or upper middle class child disappeared at the hand of a stranger, they just ordered more of them. Let's just put it that way. And we started to put the pictures on the milk cartons, which you would have probably been growing up with. Do you remember those?
Well, I remember
the milk carton kids.
Do you know what year that started?
Yeah, that started in 84.
Wow.
And actually, Eitan was the first one.
Is that right? Because I would have put it earlier than that. Like I think of it as a just like ubiquitous from my childhood, but that's not really my childhood. Like I graduated from high school in 84. So that's interesting.
Nationally, so it could have been happening locally before 84. The first national campaign was in 84.
Wow. And that's so, Lenore, that's so interesting that you spell out all of that history. So while we were all free range in the 80s and doing whatever we wanted, you're saying the culture was starting to shift, courtesy of the media, and that we were becoming...
Not just the media, but yeah.
Yeah, I guess. And we were becoming more conscious of danger that lurked out there.
What's so interesting? It's like, were we more conscious of danger, or were we more, I know that my mom, when she was raising me, and I'm sure your parents, when they were raising you, didn't think that there was no crime in the world, didn't think that there was no danger. But what I think changed is the perspective, which was that if anything happened bad to any kid anywhere, it could happen to you. Whereas I don't think my mom, before she let me walk to school, was thinking, oh, what about, could name 10 children, Eitan and Kaylee and JC, on her, going through her mind and thinking like, is it worth it? She wasn't always sort of trying to balance risk versus reward, because everything wasn't framed in terms of risk. That's really what's so interesting to me that's changed. It's like, well, is it worth it? It's like, it wasn't a question of worth it. You didn't have to think of the very worst case scenario first before you let your kid do anything when we were growing up. And I feel bad. That's sort of what's been foisted on parents, the idea that you're prudent, the more terrible things you can imagine and decide whether it's worth risking your child's life for. And of course, once you put it in that equation, nothing is worth it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I also think that it wasn't just that the media saw that this was lucrative, like that the business of abducted and missing kids was lucrative. But I think it's also that cable news, which obviously I've been a part of most of my career, localizes national stories, so
that's true.
So like there's a missing kid in Indiana, and that doesn't have anything to do with Shrewsbury, New Jersey, where I grew up, but it becomes universal because who doesn't relate to that and want that kid to be found and isn't worried about that kid? And so there is something about the 24-hour national news that we didn't have growing up. We just had our local news. We just basically had our local news, and then our evening news, but we didn't, it wasn't 24 hours.
Right. That's actually, I was just going to say, it's the 24 hours. How do you fill 24 hours? How do you keep people sort of interested enough? And obviously the continuing story of a disappearance is like, you're hoping every minute, like maybe after this break, we're going to come back with good news or at least some closure. And so people tune in, and it almost felt like, I think we do have this empathy that is so great that if you think, well, I'm going to turn it off and watch, basketball, it's almost disrespectful to the family that's going through the trauma. And I don't quite understand how empathy works, but I think you're right when you say, like, everybody's hearts were broken when something like that happened. And that's very, that rewires you, right?
Yeah, it does.
It feels so bad. Like you're glad it's not you. Let's admit that, but you're also worried that it might be you. Absolutely. And then I think something else corroded along the way, where instead of just sympathy, we started shifting our view towards blame. And if something bad happened to a kid, it was not like there, but for the grace of God, go I. It's like, what'd you do, lady? Why weren't you watching her? It felt like the sort of the trollification of our country came down really hard on parents. And the best example I can give of that was a big story was when that mother's kid fell into the gorilla pit at the Cincinnati Zoo. Do you remember this?
Of course.
Yeah. Right. And there were memes going around with like Harambe, the gorilla, like, I'm dead because that horrible mom didn't watch her kid. As if when you're going to the zoo, you of course should worry that your child is, of course, so easily going to fall into the gorilla pit. I mean, if zoos were that dangerous, nobody would go to them. I mean, you can't, there's nothing really evil or even unusual about turning one way to tie one kid's shoe and the other kid wanders off for 5 seconds because you can't get the knot out of the string, right?
Well, I understand. I feel like I have an understanding into that. And, in full disclosure, it's so funny that you're bringing up these cases.
Oh, no.
I worked for 5 years at America's Most Wanted with John Walsh. So as you know, after Adam was abducted, John became this, international crime fighter who was driven by justice.
Right. And obviously his own son's horrible demise, right?
So we all of us who worked there were so conscious of Adam, of Adam's story, and of John and his wife's tragedy and trauma. So what I came to believe is that it's not just that we're trolling parents and blaming them, it's that we're trying to figure out mentally how to stop it from happening, because it's so horrible that we have to go, well, if only she hadn't turned around and tried the shoe, then it wouldn't have happened. Like we're justifying it in our own head because I think it's a coping mechanism. I mean, psychologically speaking, we need there to have been a reason, because otherwise it's random. And if it's random, it's chaos.
And, there was that book many years ago, Why Bad Things Happen to Good People, bestseller. And at some point you'll think I'll actually read it. But it is really hard to put life into context when things are random. People write me with great ideas. And somebody once wrote me with this phrase that I find really helpful, which is the vast majority of times something bad happens to a child, it's not because of bad parents. It's because of bad luck. And to me, that actually gave me a little bit more freedom, as opposed to thinking, well, therefore, I better be totally vigilant. Because even if you are totally vigilant, Elizabeth Smart was taken from her room. Polly Klaas was taken from her room. So it's not a question of bad parents. It's a question of the odds. And there's a chapter in my book, you can't control everything. And I think one of the reasons that we are so nervous today as parents is that we're told we can. If we only spend a little more time, if we only track them with a few more devices, if we only invest in a few more cameras, if we only stay through the entire soccer practice and then and then stand outside the bathroom while they go in to change. If you do everything every single second like a total, like God, then you can be God. But A, you're not God. That's A, B, C, D. You're not God. Things happen. And there has never been a time until now when parents were expected they couldn't track their kids all the time, to be with them all the time that they're playing outside, to attend every practice. It's a huge demand. And you're a working mom. I actually think it's almost, I don't think it's a conspiracy. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it is strange that just as women were doing better in the workplace and graduating in bigger numbers and working their way up the corporate ladders and elsewhere, the demands of parenting became overwhelming. I mean, there are these statistics that mothers today, college-educated mothers, I think, are spending 7 more hours a week on parenting than the moms in the 70s, many of whom weren't working. It's just the demands have gotten so great, and the pressure is really great because, as you said, we keep saying, like, well, nothing bad happens if you're a really good parent, but you got to you have to trust your kids, and you have to trust yourself. You have to trust the world a little bit, even imperfect as they are.
But here's the paradox, and this is where you come in, and where I think the point of your book, or at least your philosophy, both, is
Yeah.
By hovering over our kids, by making sure that we leave no loose end ever so that they're never in danger, we have crippled them. We have actually inadvertently crippled them. And there's this horrible paradox that because we've never left them alone, we've never left them to their own devices, we haven't ever engendered self-sufficiency, they are helpless. I see it all the time. I see it in my own kids, and it makes me really sad. I mean, I was talking to a friend of mine about it. I tell this story a lot. We were, as 80s kids, bonding about how we were free range and we had to figure all these things out ourselves. And he tells the story that I sometimes claim is mine because it's so good, that he caught,
Yeah, why not?
he caught his teenage son, like 14-year-old son the other day, staring at the toaster oven and didn't know how to use it. Like,
Ooh.
you might burn yourself. Like, don't touch that. And so he walked in the kitchen and he saw his son standing in front of the toaster oven, staring at it, paralyzed. Like, what is as though it just landed from outer space. Like, had no idea how to make himself toast.
Yeah.
Like, that's the point that we have crippled our kids.
Yeah, I would say, once again, I'm going to blame society and not individual parents because, and actually I'll blame parents, the magazine Parents. Okay. And if we're talking favorite stories, here's mine. Yeah. A few years back, they had an article called The Playdate Playbook. And we can talk endlessly about the fact that there are play dates. When we used to, I know this, we used to just knock on Betsy's door. Can Betsy come out and play? Is Joel there? Can Joel play? And that was that. Obviously, there's play dates now. They're arranged by parents. They're very formalized. And one of the questions asked of the Playdate guru at Parents Magazine was, my kid is old enough to stay home alone at this age and often does, but now she has a Playdate over. Can I still go and run to the dry cleaner? And what did Parents Magazine say? I'm
scared right now. I'm scared for the answer. I don't know. What did Parents Magazine say?
Parents Magazine, I think you knew this, said absolutely not. And they gave two reasons. One is, and they found somebody in New Jersey, actually. There was once a mom, and she was in the backyard, and her daughter and Playdate were microwaving macaroni, and the macaroni fell on the kid and required a visit to the doctor for a burn. Okay, so there's the physical thing, all right? They're already making you afraid. And by the way, in their story, they didn't even find somebody who had left the house. The mom was still in the backyard. So they're worrying you that the kid could get physically hurt.
Well, like a macaroni burn. I mean, is there anything scarier than a macaroni burn?
No,
I mean,
I don't even tell you.
I was bracing myself.
There's Agent Orange and there's macaroni.
Right. Like I thought they were going to go with something even more extreme. But okay, the macaroni burn. I'm scared. Yeah.
So there's the macaroni burn, obviously a terror. And then there is, and I'm almost saying it exactly because I've talked about it a lot, which is that, and what if there's a spat? You want to be able to jump in before anyone's feelings get too hurt. Okay, so I just have to go on automatic pilot here because that is terrible advice. That is the worst advice anybody could give a parent. Ever. Because what they're suggesting is that your kid with her friend, if they're spatting, something will be so fragile in your child, or perhaps the other child, I guess you don't really care about, but in your child, if they're hurt, psychologically, emotionally, if they're uncomfortable even, you should be there automatically smoothing things out, using your parent sense and your vast maturity to make sure that nothing disturbs the serene surface of your child's life. And then you wonder, well, if you're talking about kids feeling kind of fragile today or mistaking things that are uncomfortable for actually being unsafe, if you've been raising your kid so that they never have a hurt feeling or an argument with their friend or macaroni from piping hot from the microwave that they made themselves at age 9, 10, or 11, you're not allowing enough normal life to seep into their maturation for them to develop. I mean, child development depends on things happening to the kid. If they're in a bubble, there's nothing happening.
Oh, totally. I mean, we have completely bubble wrapped our kids because it's not just fear of abductors, though I know that's the big boogeyman. But, there are car accidents. There are bike accidents. There are...
there's stair accidents. There's depression. There's diabetes. There's loneliness. I mean, we always think of these things happening outside the home that are going to cripple our kids, that we're going to feel very guilty about because why weren't we there and why didn't we take them? But we forget, I mean, like if we're going to play the risk game, let's talk about the fact that anxiety and depression are skyrocketing among kids. And I don't even like to talk about the self-harm and stuff because it's too scary. And I feel like parents are already scared enough. It's like, oh my God, I can't let them go because they could get hurt, but I can't let them stay because they could get depressed. It's like, what am I supposed to do? That's, at some point I will tell you about my current organization, which is a nonprofit devoted to making childhood independence easy, normal, and legal again, so that you don't have to be making all these vast calculations in your brain every time you wonder, can my kid walk to soccer?
That's really interesting. And I do want to hear about that because I am at the end of this looking for tools and help because I'm vexed by this. I mean, I'm not kidding. This takes up a lot of brain space with me because when I see my kid not know how to use the toaster, it so bums me out. I don't even know what to do with it. I don't even, I get mad at them. I get mad at myself. I didn't want to raise bubble wrapped hothouse flowers. I didn't ever want that. And I never thought that would be me. I mean, I was so fiercely independent. I was, on the continuum of independence. I was at 10, I was doing things at a really young age that were perhaps ill-advised. And
I thought you were going to say illegal.
They were. I mean, they were illegal. They were ill-advised. I was, around a posse of great people who were kids who were older than me. And it was the 80s. So, if I'm being honest, there was a lot of alcohol and drug use and dangerous car stunts. And, I had an episode. I mean, not even an episode. I mean, it was a chunk of time in my teenage years where I fell in love with a punk rock band named Shrapnel. And I followed Shrapnel around into various bars and clubs that I had no business being in. And I'm glad that you raised the point about illegality because I do think that if I were to let my kids do some of the stuff, okay, so there's a twofer. I worry that my kids won't know what to do if they were stranded alone on a corner in Queens in the middle of the night after a punk rock show. They wouldn't know how to get home. I didn't have a cell phone. I didn't have any money. So like if you don't have a cell phone and you don't have any money and you're standing on the corner, some bombed out corner in Queens, like how are you going to get home? When you...
How did you get home?
I got lucky. This van rolled up and I thought that...
Oh my God, a van. Are you kidding? A van?
A van. And I knew, honestly, like bells were going. It was 2 a.m. I was with a friend that I'd roped into coming with me. She was totally freaked out. A van is like slowly creeping down the road. I was like, here we go. I'm about to be sold into white slavery. That was a big thing when I was a teenage girl.
Now they call it trafficking. Yeah.
And the van rolled up and the passenger window rolled down. And the lead guitarist said, "What are you doing out here?" And I was like,
you got to go with the lead.
I got the band drove me home. The band found me and drove me.
That's a dream. That's like from nightmare to dream fulfillment. Wow.
I loved this band so much. And like to see them behind the scenes, I like, they would never normally give in like the 15-year-old the time of day, but they were like, get in the van right now. Wow. You shouldn't be out here alone. Like get in here. And they drove me home and I was like safe and sound. But it went from nightmare to dream. Yes. But my point is that I would be arrested now. For real. Like if you had your 2 15-year-old daughters with no cell phone, no money, standing on a bombed out corner in the middle of some New York street at 2 a.m, like cops would frown on that. I feel like, legally.
They would frown on it. You wouldn't be arrested.
Okay. Well, here's an example. As you may recall, in the 80s, there was underage drinking and there were backyard parties and parents weren't home.
Yeah.
And then they would come home at some time and we would all scatter and you often get into cars and make our own way home. Now you would be arrested for that.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know exactly what the law is, but yeah, I don't think you're not allowed to serve liquor to anyone underage. And I think if you're having it at your home and you're considered the, loco parentis, that's probably wrong.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that.
That's interesting. So it's so funny. Yeah, I just have to say it's funny talking to you because your kids are 16 and 14. Normally I'm talking about like, well, do you think 9 is old enough to maybe walk to school? But you're in the middle of like, wait, what about all the alcohol I did? And what about my kids? Interesting.
Totally. I mean, and I don't want teenagers who don't know how to fend for themselves and who can't get out of a sticky situation. But if I'm being honest, my kids are not in sticky situations very often. They're just not.
Right. Well, there's different generations of kids too. I mean, the kids in the 60s were different too. You know, they're all experimenting with drugs and, you know, rock and roll for the first time, and pot came in and the pill. I mean, different generations are obviously different. What you can get in trouble with so Let Grow is the organization that I run now. It's a nonprofit. It tries to make, as I said, independence really normal. One of the things we've had great success with this year is changing the laws in a couple states. This year, Texas changed their law, and so did Oklahoma, and we've already had Utah. And that says that simply giving your kids some unsupervised time is not illegal. You don't have to second guess yourself.
So wait a second. Before you helped change the law, giving your kids unsupervised time was illegal?
No, it was not specified. Like, what is child neglect is really broad. And in most states, in 47 states, it says something like parents must not neglect their kids. What is neglect? Neglect is not properly supervising them. It's like, oh, well, thank you. That doesn't really define it for me. So what the new law does is it narrows it. And it says, unless you're a parent leaving your kid in a situation that is obviously dangerous and the kid is obviously not ready. So, you know, if it's a 3-year-old at night on that corner, that's bad. But if you think that they're ready, and statistically, you know, you weren't crazy to let your kid play in the park. There's other kids playing in the park. It's a beautiful summer day. You don't have to second guess yourself, because sometimes parents have been arrested or investigated for these things just because a passerby sees a child walking home from the pool and says, well, is that okay? I don't even know. And they call 911, and 911 has to respond. In this case, 911 can say, the Child Protective Services can say, is the kid okay? Yes. Do they look like they know where they're going? Yes. Are they, you know, crying? Are they bleeding? No. Okay. Thank you for calling. And they just don't have to follow up on the calls when people who are so unused to seeing children doing anything on their own anymore feel like, wow, isn't it my duty as a good citizen to call and report them?
You know, I want to bring up a couple of things and get your pointers. Okay, so on Thursday, you'll hear the rest of my conversation with Lenore, and we talk about how parents in this hovering culture can still raise resilient kids. She has an organization that has dedicated itself to this. It's called Let Grow, and it's really trying to make this happen. So I look forward to her tips for all of us. I'm Alisyn Camerata, and I look forward to connecting with you then. Thanks so much for listening. Distraction is created by Sounds Great Media. Our producer is Sarah Gerton, and special thanks to Emma Marshall, Melissa Blum, and Caitlin Goldsmith. Remember to subscribe to Distraction wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. And please share your feedback with us. Email connect@distractionpodcast.com.
The episode you just heard was made possible by our sponsor, Landmark College, the college for students who learn differently, offering comprehensive supports for students with ADHD and other learning differences, both on campus and online. Learn more at lcdistraction.org.